I recognise a history of truth which acknowledges the impacts of invasion and colonisation on Aboriginal people, resulting in the forcible removal from their lands. I stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history, and a continued effort to fight for Aboriginal justice, paving the way for a stronger future. Hello and welcome to Working on Water, a collaborative project between That's What I Call Science and the Royal Society of Tasmania. We'll be interviewing 4 women in marine science. My name is Kate Johnson and I'm joined today by Megan Hartog. She's a Voyage Operations Manager working at the CSIRO Marine National Facility. She organises research voyages on the research vessel, the Investigator, which I'm sure a lot of us have seen docked at the Hobart waterfront. Now, Megan, before we launch into all the ins and outs of what you do as part of your role as a Voyage Operations Manager, we'd really like to know a little bit about you. So would you mind starting us off with what really sparked your interest in marine science?
Sure, yep. I think it was sparked at quite a young age. I think from really early on, everything under the water seemed so much more fascinating to me than anything on land. And I think that came through a lot of time spent on the water with my family, and I did my dive course at quite a young age, and so did a lot of diving and fishing with my family and with my dad, and that really opened up a whole new world for me. So from that early age, I knew I wanted to explore that world, and I really felt already from primary school that I wanted to be a marine scientist. So it was definitely my passion and ambition.
Oh, that's really lovely. And what about now, in your role now, what do you really enjoy about working in marine science?
I enjoy my role now in that I get to still interact with researchers, and I get to be on the cutting edge of research, but more from a different vantage point. So as a technician, so I more see the behind the scenes aspect, and I really enjoy that in that I get exposure to a whole range of different fields and different people, but I get to see the behind the scenes part of it, and I find that really rewarding.
And so as a technician, what do you mean by the different perspective? How do you think your perspective is different to perhaps someone doing research in marine science?
Yeah, I think it's we're a bit more of a generalist and probably a dedicated researcher. So we work across a whole range of different scientific fields. So on board the ship there's geoscientists and oceanographers and atmospheric scientists and a whole range of people, but our job is the same, and that's to help them get their science on the ship, help them to get the most of the time out of the ship, and just make sure everything comes together at the end of the day so that they can go out and do their work, which is a different perspective in that we deal more with the planning and the administration, but still get to be involved with that research as well.
Oh, that's really awesome. A really important job that helps facilitate everyone else's job.
Yeah.
So having an interest in marine science that you've had ever since childhood, I wonder if you have a favourite marine organism or a favourite marine ecosystem you might like to tell us about?
Oh, that's a tough one. I feel like it changes. I feel like every year it's probably different. I think early on, like a lot of people, I loved manta rays and I loved turtles and everything. But I think as I went on in my career and I learnt more about different ecosystems, I started to learn that sometimes the less glamorous ones were more important, or had a special kind of value. So I remember I did a lot of work with salt marshes in my previous job and became really passionate about salt marshes. They don't look like much, and they can be a bit muddy and stinky, but when you have that different level of understanding about their importance, I think you really grow to value them. So that's a bit of a strange one, but every year it changes, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea that those sorts of ecosystems, they underpin the lives of all those perhaps more traditionally charismatic creatures like manta
the
rays.
pretty exciting things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you did a bit of work, I think maybe for your honours project on soft corals. Did you have a tema?
I
did.
Tell us
a little about that?
Yeah, so a lot of people probably wouldn't be aware, but in the Tamar estuary up in Launceston, toward the lower estuary past Beauty Point, there's actually some really diverse rocky reef communities. And part of my study was to go out and actually investigate those, because people don't know about them and people have never really actually gone and had a look what's there. So the Tamar gets a really bad rap for being dirty and muddy, but we were looking at a totally different part of the Tamar and trying to just shed a bit of light on those communities. And part of that, we went down and we took photos and we took samples and just tried to understand what was there. And in doing so, we discovered some species that have never been described before, we believe. So yeah, that was a really exciting project, and I guess it gave people a different perspective on the estuary and probably a different appreciation of the more beautiful aspect of the estuary.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's really interesting, because I think the Tamar is traditionally sort of portrayed as, it's not somewhere where you'd think there'd be a really beautiful unique ecosystem, I guess, so close to town. But
that's it, right on the doorstep.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And since you've worked in marine science, you've worked in lots of different roles, lots of different capacities. I wonder if maybe there's been a moment where you've had a thought or maybe a realisation about yourself or your role as a marine scientist or marine science in general that's really impacted you, that you might like to tell us about?
Ooh, I think, a lot of it has probably just been realising how interconnected everything is. And I think maybe starting off in marine science, I was quite focused on the organisms. I found them really interesting and beautiful, and the ecosystems. But then I realised that humans are part of that ecosystem too. And I think the human element I've really enjoyed, just the people you get to meet and interact with as part of my work, and especially field work. So I've actually realised that, I love nature and I love organisms, but I really have enjoyed the people side of things a lot more than I anticipated, I think, which has been interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose no matter what you do, you're working with people.
Yeah, you can't avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that honours work you did where you were discovering new species in the Tamar estuary, can you tell us a little bit about that feeling when you see something no one else has seen before? How does that feel?
I think it was a slow realisation, because it came through a lot of hours in the lab, a lot of looking at photographs and DNA and everything else. And so I think it wasn't a big bombshell moment. It was more a slow, oh, hang on, this is something new, and this is something unique, and this deserves to be explored further. So it was more just a slow process of a lot of hard work, a lot of lab hours, and then at the end, having that kind of confirmation, this is most likely a new species, which is really exciting. And people love discoveries, but in some ways it's not surprising as well, because no one's looked in the Tamar before. So if you haven't looked, then of course there's going to be unknown things there. So it is exciting and surprising, but in some ways not as well, because it really was the first study of these communities. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because you think of science and you think of that sort of stock image idea of a eureka moment, and it's not often like that. No. It's a lot of work that goes into it.
Combination of hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Megan, you organise voyages on a research vessel called the Investigator. Where does this boat actually go?
It goes all over, to be honest. It covers all of Australia's marine estate, so that could be anywhere up in the tropics, around Darwin or Broome, right down to the Antarctic ice edge. So really, all over Australia's marine estate, and it's really the only dedicated Australian research vessel that covers that entire area.
Wow.
So often during a year we'll spend the summer down in the Southern Ocean. The weather's a bit kinder then. And then, the past couple of years we've done almost a complete circumnavigation through the winter months. So,
awesome.
Everywhere.
No, that's really cool, because I always imagine those ships just going to sort of the Antarctic. I suppose that's what you see the images of. That's really interesting, because all around Australia.
Yep.
Yeah. So what sort of information do people collect on these voyages?
Covers every discipline really. So we have geoscience voyages, and I went on one last year where they're dredging up rocks from seamounts and dating the rocks. We have atmospheric voyages where they're measuring atmospheric properties. We've got biological voyages where they're trawling for fish or other species, mapping voyages. It really covers a whole range of different disciplines, and some voyage could have multiple projects, so different projects looking at completely different things. It's just trying to get as much science on the ship as possible.
Oh, cool. So you've been on some of these voyages?
Yep. We occasionally go on board in a support role on board as a voyage manager. So we normally go on between about 2 or 3 voyages a year on average on board. And that's the best bit of the job.
I bet it would be. And when you're on board and you're helping as a Voyage Operations Manager, what sort of things are you doing?
It's mainly around just being that point of contact for both the science party and the crew, and working with both parties and with the support staff on board just to make sure everyone's happy and supported. Often you have to make a few planning decisions kind of on the fly if the weather's bad or a bit of equipment breaks down. So it's really providing that support and that, I guess, connection with the land-based support as well on board for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And how long are the voyages usually?
They range. So they're up to 60 days in duration. That's the maximum length of voyages, but they could be, we've got one heading out soon that's 10 days. So a whole range, everything in between that.
Oh, that's really interesting. So there must be lots of things that you have to consider in the planning stage, before the trip actually starts. Yeah. What sort of things would you find yourself doing on a typical day when you're in the process of planning a voyage?
It shifts throughout the process. So we start working with the scientists about 12 months out from a voyage to start planning, and then for a full year we're working with them on a whole range of different things. So we develop a voyage plan which outlines everything they plan to do on the voyage. We get participants ready, so if they need to get their medicals done or paperwork done. We make sure all the equipment's ready, so we get a big equipment list and we make sure it's all serviced and up to date. We might apply for permits to actually do the work in different areas. So a whole bunch of different tasks in the lead up to, and it varies a little bit voyage to voyage as well, depending on what they're actually working on.
And with all those considerations, all those different aspects, you're working with people, you're working with equipment, working with a big boat that could, run into things. What are some things that you have to consider in your job when you're planning or when you're on the ship that people might not necessarily think of first when they think of what you do?
I guess it's all the behind the scenes things. So we've got to get equipment potentially from the whole way around the globe. Here in Hobart, we've got to get people the whole way around the globe here in Hobart, all on the right schedule, ready for the voyage. In terms of what people might not think about, I think it's just the complexity of the operations. Especially for some voyages where there's multiple projects, up to 60 people on board the ship, lots of different bits of equipment, just trying to make it, it's all like different pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, just trying to make it all fit together. It's the best way to describe it, I think.
Absolutely. That sounds extremely complex. And when you are on one of these voyages, I guess because there are so many aspects going on, I'm just wondering if there's a situation where you've been on a voyage or you've planned a voyage where something has maybe gone wrong that you might be able to tell us about?
Nothing overly disastrous, which is good.
That's really good.
I think it's probably safe to say things go wrong on every voyage, but by wrong it's more just unexpected, and often it just means thinking outside the box or finding a workaround. I think just given how complex things are that inevitably things aren't going to line up perfectly, and that's where you really just have to be able to think on your feet and be really adaptable, and work as a team to try and work around things. So weather's one example. Sometimes the weather doesn't behave, especially in the Southern Ocean. So then it's just a matter of trying to figure out a contingency or, just reshuffling things in the schedule to still get the most out of the voyage.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are on one of these trips, Megan, or when you're planning it for other people, how does that work with, I guess you've got this group of people who could be going away for weeks, they could be going away for days. What's the food situation?
So the catering team do an incredible job on the ship because they have to cater for up to 60 people with some with dietary requirements, some for up to 60 days at sea. So it's mind-boggling how long they can keep fresh food fresh.
Absolutely.
So having salads 3 weeks into a voyage, I don't know how they manage that, but they do. So they've got good food storage systems on board which really help, but they also do a great job because they're serving 3 hot meals a day for up to 60 people, day in, day out, regardless of what the weather's doing. they do an amazing job feeding us very well.
That's pretty incredible. I reckon people would be pretty interested in what goes on inside one of those research vessels. So what about the sleeping arrangements? How does that work?
Yeah, so there's a number of different berths on the ship, so you can have a single cabin to yourself or you could share a cabin. And we've got cabins on different levels, so we've got a level dedicated to science people, a couple of levels dedicated to crew. Each voyage we allocate cabins depending on what people are working on and what shifts people are working on as well, because it's important. The ship operates 24/7, so people work around the clock non-stop, and we normally have two 12-hour shifts, so 2 a.m. to 2 p.m, 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. is how people work. So we try and allocate cabins so that people can each get time in their cabin on the opposite shift and have a bit of privacy and a bit of downtime. So it's a different way of living and working. It takes a bit of adjustment, but
When you say people take these shifts and they're working, do you mean on the ship or when you're docked at Antarctica and people are getting off the ship and working on the ice? Is that?
No, just on the ship.
Just on the ship. Yeah.
So once people join the voyage, they'll transition normally into that 12-hour shift, especially our support staff. But it can vary a bit per project as well when they're actually doing their operations too. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. So Megan, are there any difficulties that you've encountered while you've been pursuing a career in science that you'd like to talk about?
I guess early on it was such a vast field and I never had a particular career in mind that I knew I wanted to pursue. So when I graduated from uni, it was really, what now? Like, which area do I go into? But I think the important thing was just meeting people who had experience within fields who were just willing to impart their knowledge and experience or give advice. And another part of it was just taking every opportunity, even if it was something I thought, I don't really know if I want to do that, just taking it and seeing where it led me. And through doing that, I figured out what I was actually interested in doing for a career.
Try all the options first.
Try a bit of everything.
Totally. And speaking of sort of taking people's advice who are in different areas, what would be your advice to your younger self or to younger people who might be looking at a career in science?
I think early on I just was overwhelmed by the feeling I don't know anything in this field. Like, I know so little compared to so many of the other people I met. But I think I'd probably tell myself that that's okay, don't worry about that, because everyone starts out somewhere and everyone starts out not knowing anything. So even the smartest people started not knowing a whole lot. Just probably keep grabbing opportunities and make the most of anyone with experience who's willing to share that. And you look back in a few years and you'll be amazed at how much you do just naturally absorb through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of maybe feeling like you don't know enough, you don't know anything, I think that maybe that does stop a lot of people getting into science. That sort of, I wasn't good at science at high school, I wasn't good at maths. What would you say to people or young people in particular who might be thinking that? They might think, gosh, I love marine science, but I'm not good at maths, I can't do it. What would you say?
I think if you're passionate about it, I think you can do anything. I think, if you're genuinely interested in something, you'll work through any kind of barrier to get to that thing. And it's worth remembering science is such a big field, so just because you don't like one particular aspect of it, shouldn't stop you from pursuing it. I don't like maths at all. And I've just luckily found myself in an area of science where I don't really need to use much maths. I think it's such a vast field. You can find your own little niche in that field.
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you're saying. And if you might not be good at an area, you are entering into this huge scientific sort of community where people have different strengths and people can help you out. If someone's good at one thing, they can help you and you can help other people. Really is a community. Absolutely. And what do you think you'd say to people who might want a career in science but not necessarily in a research sort of capacity?
I'd say definitely pursue look into the technical roles, because they're not as visible and they're probably not the kind of roles you hear about on your careers day at school, but there's so many of them. On board the ship we have mechanical technicians, we've got IT people who run the IT systems on the ship, we've got hydrochemists who work on the chemistry part, and yeah, they're all people who love working at sea. So I'd say, yeah, there's so many roles out there, and just have a look for them. And yeah, so no, there's plenty of roles in those areas. You just probably need to look a little bit harder and not think of marine science as only the frontline research, because that research takes a lot of background work to go into it.
Yep, absolutely. So Megan, do you think there's a perception about technical staff being one sort of person, perhaps a majority, a team of men on these research vessels? Do you think that that's maybe a perception that people have?
Yeah, I think it is, and that perception is probably accurate still in some parts of the maritime industry. But I've been really pleasantly surprised in that onboard investigator, often it is a 50-50 split between male and female. Often there's more females on voyages. So I think that's opened my eyes. Because growing up, I had that perception myself. I thought, oh, you know, it's a bit groundbreaking to be a woman working in this area, but I've come to realise that there's plenty of women working in this area, both as scientists and technical staff. And yeah, that may be different in other areas, but on board the ship and the kind of projects we get on board, it is really even. It's not weighted too much one way or the other.
And the fact that you sort of perhaps had that perception when you were younger that maybe it was a field dominated by men, it might be, you know, maybe difficult or maybe quite unusual for you to get into a field like that. Do you think it's then therefore really important to have mentors like yourself for younger people?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I remember when early in high school, I really, thought a lot about studying marine science, but none of my friends were studying that. They were all going into teaching or something else, and I thought, oh, is this something I can do? But I remember at that stage, there were women that I knew who were studying aquaculture and who were studying marine science. And I remember looking at them and thinking, oh, well, if they can do it, then I can do it too. And talking to them about it and getting a realistic viewpoint from them about it. And that was really, really important for me in that early stage when I was teetering a little bit. I knew I wanted to do it, but whether or not I could. And I think as well, going to uni, you just meet more and more women in the field, and you start to realise that it's not unusual and it shouldn't be a big deal, and that's been inspiring as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what has been one of your recent favourite moments on one of these voyages, Megan?
Probably my recent one would be the most recent voyage I went on. We went a transit voyage from Brisbane across to Darwin. And we had about 5 different projects on that voyage, all looking at completely different things. And I just really enjoyed that voyage because we got to see a bit of coastline I've never seen before. I never thought I would see up through the Torres Strait. And on that voyage, we had a really interesting mix of people. We had a mix of people from Parks Australia, from all different organisations. Again, we had geologists and chemists, and it was interesting to see we had both scientists and the people who actually manage those areas and how those two things were brought together so well. And I think that was really good for me to see that there was pretty much the whole picture on a voyage of here's the data we collect and here's the way we're going to use it to actually look after these areas.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. So thank you, Megan. Thank you so much for being with us here. And thank you everyone for watching. And if you like what you saw, you can follow us at That's What I Call Science on our social media and the Royal Society of Tasmania. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about the RV Investigator, we have some worksheets that will be available during Science Week. Thanks for watching and goodbye.